Hello Capricorn, and welcome to your year 2023 Astrology and Horoscope forecast. This is for the Sun or the Ascendant. Now, what I'm going to do to begin with is outline how I'm going to approach the video. Of course, there are 52 weeks in each year beginning on the 1st of January, but the astrological year is broken down into 4 units of 13 weeks. These are known as the Cardinal Quadrants because the Western tropical astrological calendar begins with the spring equinox. In year 2023, that's on the 20th of March. So we first need to look back to the Cardinal Quadrant 4 of year 2022 of the 21st of December to see what energy will be flowing as a backdrop for the first 12 weeks of the new year. We also need to look at the lunar eclipse which occurred on the 8th of November in the sign of Taurus, because that clashed with Saturn, your ruling planet, in your sector of everyday resources. And that's going to provide a backdrop energy for about the first 4 months of year 2023. Then of course we've got the solar return. So that's where all the planets are lined up as we go into the new year. Particularly critical for your sign because of course the Sun is always in the sign of Capricorn at this part of the year. But you do have a very powerful combination between Venus and Pluto, which I'm really excited to share with you. Now we also need to look at the major ingresses. Pluto's been with you since 2008 and it is going to be moving for a brief period this year from March the 23rd to June the 11th into your second solar house, the part of your scope to do with your values and how your life, the foundation, is established. But of course Saturn, your ruling planet, has been in that very area for the last 2.25 years. So as we make our way into the new year, it's preparing to move into the sign of Pisces on March the 7th. So I need to tell you a lot about that. Now, Jupiter is the planet of growth and optimism. On May the 16th, it moves into the fabulous 5th house of your situation. But you've had Uranus in this area for some time, a very restless influence, and of course the North Node. But on the 12th of July, the North Node reverses into the part of your situation to do with home, family and emotion. Also, there's a very powerful solar eclipse on the 20th and 21st of April I need to share with you, which is also in your sector of home and hearth, and that provides a backdrop for the following 6 months. We also have a month before that a new moon in this area too. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of astrologers will be focusing on is the role of Saturn in the sign of Pisces. But you already have Neptune in this area. Neptune's the planet of the spiritual realm. It's very much to do with our senses, can be to do with the arts and creativity. But it's a very gassy, imperceptible influence. And I actually feel it's going to have a much greater impact on your year than even your ruler Saturn. So please stay with me while I share why. Also, we do have 2 lunar eclipses, once more accessing in the signs of Scorpio and Taurus. But in October, we have a second solar eclipse, which is in your sector of success. So really exciting possibilities there. Venus, the planet of love and affection, but also of loot, is in an extended 4.5 month journey through your 8th house. Very, very sensual area, but good for money making. And so that's another standout feature of this year. And what I'm also going to do is go through each of the key lunations right throughout this year and the big planetary influences. So this will be quite a detailed forecast, so please do stay with me. Now, if you would like to ascend above this zodiac broadcast and understand what year 2023 holds for you personally, if you give me 3 pieces of your birth data of time, date and place of birth, I can give you a forecast for 23. If you order in year 2022, I'll give you the rest of that year free. Plus I'll give you your roadmap, your character analysis, which can guide your moves for the rest of your life. These documents are absolutely, totally individual to you and can give you searing insights into the way you can plan and manage your future moves. Finally, if you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. And if you've already done so, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for being with me. So Capricorn, let's first look at that total lunar eclipse. We all have our desires and aspirations, and we like to be free-spirited, and especially with Uranus on the moon, the desire to express that part of your nature that is more individual may need to be balanced against the financial reality of your situation or the demands and needs of others, the Sun in the 11th house of Scorpio. So I feel there could be a little bit of frustration as year 2022 came to a close, and that could still manifest itself in the early part of the new year. But of course, on the 21st of December, we had the final Cardinal Quadrant of the year, and the Sun made its way into your sign. Now this is an exciting event. Your sign is very much to do with continuity, and it's to do with an appreciation of tradition, and it can be to do with your leadership skills, understanding what's important and how to measure your approach to situations. But the Sun does forge a square with Jupiter. Jupiter's in the part of your situation to do with your home, family and emotion. Now at Christmas time, particularly if it's been a tough year, you may want to really pull out all the stops to try to be as generous as possible to those you care for. Jupiter can be a very positive influence, and because the new moon in your sign is on the 23rd and Jupiter's also influencing the Sun there, it could see you coming up with some very ingenious ways that you can still do as much as you possibly can to give people what they want. But there's also a midpoint between the moon, which is in your 12th house, and the Sun in your sign at 0 degrees. And this is in Sagittarius, also your 12th house. Also Mars in its retrograde is in opposition to the moon. So the 12th, 6th house opposition with Moon and Mars is quite unsettling. It may be that some vague anxieties may just be floating around you, and however much Jupiter's kind of pushing you to see the bright side, there may be another part of your nature that is feeling a little bit tentative. Also, that midpoint is squaring with Neptune, and as I mentioned before, Neptune's going to be a major influence on your year. Now, Neptune's been in your 3rd house since 2012. The 3rd house is very much to do with everyday communication, but it can also be about neighbours and siblings. Neptune is a brilliant influence for expressing our creative talents or embracing the spiritual realm. The problem with the 3rd house and Neptune is it can almost be a trickster planet, and at times just see conversations occurring that behind those conversations we almost imagine that there's another set of energies or intentions that may actually not be there. So Neptune can be distorted. So the midpoint in your 12th house of the psyche squaring with Neptune, the planet of the psyche, in your 3rd house of everyday communications, suggests that the first 12 weeks of this new year could see you a little bit oversensitive to the energies immediately around you. So going to be important to avoid gossip where possible. Even if someone, seems to be talking about something that's relatively harmless, at some level, the propulsion of a particular idea about another person who's not there in order to say how they feel is a little bit distasteful. We may all occasionally share with our loved ones how we really feel about some of the people around us, but I wouldn't get involved in anything where you're propelling a particular message forwards. I don't think that will be good for you. But equally, if you know that there's someone around you who tends to have a little bit of a penchant for this type of gossip, then probably best to keep your cards quite close to your chest as you come in to this new year. Also, the solar return at the start of this year does see Mercury in your sign in retrograde. So Mercury in your sign is very much about dealing with more factual and business-like matters, but the first house is where we initiate. So throughout this year, when it comes to anything that you need to initiate or manage personally, the first house, it's vital that when it comes to those physical things that you're managing, the energy of Capricorn, that you show the maximum amount of precision and care to make sure that this year isn't blighted by a series of misunderstandings. But really excitingly, Venus and Pluto are in a conjunction at the turn of this year. Now, Pluto, of course, is the planet of power, the planet of transformation, and it will move out of your sign briefly from March the 23rd to June the 11th into your sector of everyday resources, but also your core values and the foundation of your world. So when Venus and Pluto are together, it suggests that your personality power, Venus, can be linked with your drive, Pluto, to manifest some kind of draw to you of something that you want. Now, if you're single, it could be greater attention if you're wanting to meet a significant other. On the other hand, if you're someone who's a creative, you could use the power of this combination to leverage Pluto, the talents you have, Venus. So a really evocative combination that you can use to your benefit throughout this year. Now the Sun, just like the turn of the year in 2022, is in a very productive angle with Uranus. Uranus is pushing you to be a little bit more free-spirited, to be open to innovations and changes. It can, in the fifth house, be very much to do with self-expression. And it's pushing you, therefore, to live in your own power, to march to the sound of your own drum, to have the confidence to be more authentically yourself, not in terms of your relationship with yourself, but how you interact with others. So if there's part of you that wants to be a bit more radical and daring, then this particular aspect encourages you to keep doing that, keep believing that you can be more than the person who keeps things very solid and together and, really maintains the structures that do give us a sense of security. But there is much more to you. For example, your wonderful sense of humour. So Uranus is pushing you to embrace having some fun and being a bit zany here and there. Now, as we go into this new year, the position of Mars is in retrograde, but in your sixth house, which can be very productive and hard-working. Mars is the planet of self and ego to a degree, but also the planet of desire. But the sixth house is hardly the sexiest location for Mars to be. But if you're a dedicated person and work is important to you, the fact that Mars is in a very positive alliance with Jupiter as the year begins suggests that working from home or providing a home-based service or doing something which helps people in a practical way, can bring you a great deal of gratification in 23, whether it's in a business sense or whether it's more personally. But the midpoint at the turn of the year is in the sign of Pisces, just under 7 degrees, and that's squaring the position of Mars. So I think you're going to have quite a lot of nervous energy this year, but it's going to be important to use it in the right kind of way. So when the 3rd and 6th houses, particularly with Mars, are in the mix, it can make us quite restless, a bit edgy, and maybe some conversations can be a bit more highly charged and even a bit critical or a bit picky. So just be aware of that throughout this year. However, on the 6th of January, there is a full moon in your opposite sign, but the position of the moon shines back and reflects the sun in a conjunction with Mercury. Mercury at this point still in retrograde, but it just suggests that when it comes to your relationships, it is important that you find your voice. And especially this year, because essentially the Mercury retrogrades, and there are going to be 4, but going through 4 different zodiac signs. But the first 3 are in earth signs, the 4th in an earth sign because it returns back to your sign, but we have 1st, 5th, 9th. So this is very much about initiation. If you like, for you, it's very much about the fire energy. So Mercury is about how we think, how we articulate our ideas, but for you this year you want to initiate too, but the precision that's required when a retrograde occurs is important. So with Mercury retrograde on this particular full moon, I think if someone close to you feels that you're too tied up with your own needs, then don't react. Mercury's asking you to be a bit more detached and to try to find an accord how you can work together more effectively. Now, on the 12th of January, Mars is going to go direct, and it's going direct right through to the 25th of March. The great news for you, Capricorn, is this is going to give you a lot of extra vitality. Now, if you've set your New Year's resolutions and you're determined to shift some weight, quit smoking, do more exercise, eat less convenience food or takeaways, in general, clean up your act, Mars will give you a lot of get-go to achieve that, and that will increase once Mars goes direct. Now, on the 15th of January, Mercury ends its retrograde. So if there has been something you've been contemplating that hasn't quite gained the traction you wanted right at the start of this year, it should start to improve on the 15th. The 21st, however, sees a new moon in your 2nd house of everyday resources. But of course you've had Saturn in this area for 2.25 years. And Saturn has probably made things a little bit more difficult. We've also had COVID, which has had an impact on many people's financial situation, especially if you work for yourself or you work in catering or hospitality. These are areas that have really taken a wallop. And of course the prevailing headwind for us all is increased cost and interest rates, and it is a bit touch and go, and this seems to have been something of a story for you over these last 2.25 years. The interesting thing about this new moon is it may help you to see that even if things have been challenging, you've actually done better than you may have imagined to marshal the resources you have had really effectively. But your ruler Saturn does oppress Venus right on this event. So even though some money could come in at this time, the following month, it's possible there may be some costs that will see it going out. Now, future forward from this position, we have the Uranus retrograde ending on the 22nd. I think Uranus retrograde for you, and it's going to happen again later this year, is really asking you to think very carefully about your talents, your creativity, your individuality. Uranus retrograde sees us a bit more reflective, but when it goes direct, it's pushing us to push the energy outwards. So it's asking you to take the thoughts you've had, in recent months, and actually now demonstrate them and show a little bit of dash and elan. If you have an ounce of talent in any way, don't withhold from demonstrating it to others. I think that's what Uranus is asking you to do, to be a bit more daring. Uranus is the planet of truth. It's the planet in myth that governs the sky. It also influences astrology. But in the sign of Taurus, it's not so happy. It's technically in full, F-A-L-L, because the sign of Taurus resists change. And there's something about you, even though you're a cardinal sign, that will really embrace continuity. Your patience and persistence and going through the processes diligently is what makes you you. But sometimes we do need to shake things up and be a little bit more daring. So an opportunity to do so from the 22nd. Now February the 20th sees a Pisces new moon, and this is really interesting. For you, Pisces is house 3, so it's those everyday conversations which will need care this year. But Saturn, right at the end of Aquarius, is in a conjunction, a dissociate conjunction, with the position of the moon. So an important conversation can occur in the following 4 weeks, but choose your words carefully, mean what you say, and say what you mean. It could be that there could be rather a frank encounter with a sibling or a neighbour, or perhaps if you're someone who's very interested in digital technology or communication, or you have a website, this will be a point of the year when, if you work very, very hard, you can get your message out there in a very powerful way. However, March the 7th sees Saturn arrive in Pisces. Collectively, there's going to be a lot of heightened awareness to the impact we as human beings, person-kind, are having on the planet, but particularly water tables, so seas, rivers, lakes, streams, because of the water element of the sign of Pisces. And Saturn is going to push us to clean our act up. So whether we're using less water in the bath, keeping our showers a bit shorter, being prudent with resources in general is going to be part of the big picture for us all. But the 3rd house, remember, is about those siblings, those neighbours, those everyday relationships. And you may find, because the 3rd house can also be to do with our ideals or ideologies, that your point of view may get challenged like never before over the next 2.5 years. And it may come as a little bit of a surprise that how you express yourself, people can start to push back on. Because the energy in astrology comes in, sort of incoming from others, as well as the energy we pick up from the heavens ourselves, celestially, our direct line, and how we alter from that energy. So it's a two-way street. And I think that you could be surprised by how some people do challenge you. And it could be some people in your everyday world who start to resist some of your way of being. So that's the more challenging side of Saturn. The more productive side of Saturn, and you understand this better than any other sign, is that by rolling up your sleeves, showing that application, no little perspiration, if you want to learn a new skill, especially through an online course, 3rd house very much to do with technology, or you want to learn to drive, you want to get physically fitter, or you want to learn a language, or you want to share ideas you've got by writing a book that requires a lot of discipline, Saturn in your 3rd house can bring great rewards and satisfaction over the next 2.5 years. And Saturn also forges some very helpful links this year. As I said before, it's not all bad with Saturn. And often when Saturn moves over a house cusp, in a personal analysis I would do of a client, and they've really, really worked hard, that can be a point of breakthrough. It really can. Now March the 14th sees Mars squaring Neptune. If this rings a bell, because in October and November, within 3 degrees, which is very active, they were square. And there was 2 exact connections in the square at 90 degrees during those 2 months. So this is the 3rd pass. But Mars is in your 6th house of productivity, and the position of Neptune in the 3rd house of those ideas. So something can lose its energy. It could even be yourself. Your own physical dynamism really dips down at this point, and you may be thinking, what is it? Is this Saturn? Well, Saturn can, in the 3rd house, affect your nervous energy. So it will be very important to maintain your nervous health well. Early nights, some nights off the booze. If possible, if you're open to it, things like moments of quietness, even meditation, and so forth and so on. But Neptune is a very dissipating, if you think energy, if you think of the water lapping on the seashore, it can erode the rocks. So that's something to consider, that however virtuous you may want to be with Mars in the 6th house through to the 25th of March, Neptune at this point can just see something you've been working hard towards just really turn to mush, which could be very frustrating, very disappointing, but also very dispiriting. And Neptune has a habit of dispiriting us, so just be conscious of that. Now on March the 20th we have the spring equinox and the start of the Western tropical astrological calendar. Now for us all, the sun moves into the sign of Aries, very much to do with initiation, getting things off the ground in the following 13 weeks. But it can also be to do with injecting ongoing strands that are positive with greater dynamism, because this is a cardinal sign like you. This cardinal quadrant is giving you a lot of get-go. But for you, of course, this area of your chart, solar-wise, is house 4, very much about home, family, emotion. So for you, the motivation can be to make some improvements in those areas. Now, the midpoint, as the quadrant occurs, is actually in Pisces, and it's also in a conjunction with Neptune. So that's your 3rd house. So you can see that your ideas, the 3rd house where Saturn is newly arriving, which has been greatly influenced by Neptune since 2012, this can be an area where it may be more difficult to express how you feel or to get others to comprehend where you're coming from. But you may think it's all about Saturn, but it's actually a lot to do with Neptune. So if you understand your own sensitivity to discussion and people not necessarily agreeing with you, you can start to reprogram your thinking, the 3rd house, in a more productive way. But the next day we have a new moon in the sign of Aries. But this not only is seeing you become more conscious of the need to take greater control, home, family, emotional matters, it's actually squaring up to Mars. Why is this? Well, it's because Mars is at 27 degrees in Gemini at this point. So in technical terms, it's known as a square, but a dissociate square. So for you, it's nearly into your sector of relating. So I would say that in the 13 weeks from the spring equinox, there is the potential for tension around emotional relationships, where there's a lack of clarity around communication, or someone wants to in some way control the environment rather too much. Now it could be you that pushes back against someone who's got a bit of a negative attitude or energy. But equally be aware of your own ideas, your own way of expressing them, and how you interact with others immediately around you every day, how that's creating your reality. Now on March the 21st, we also have actually a great link between Mars and Saturn. And this is what I was saying about Saturn can reward you this year. And because you have the attributes of Saturn deeply ingrained in your personality, you know that if you really put your mind to things, that success is possible. And the reason this is happening, Mars is so late in Gemini, it's actually stretching into a trine with the early position Saturn in Pisces. So imagine at this point that Mars is in Cancer. So of course that's 7th-3. So if you can cut through the swathe, avoid the misunderstandings that Neptune can bring, avoid the potential to imagine that there are conspiracies or people not necessarily concurring with you, keep it all out in the open, and Mars and Saturn can help you to have a more constructive pushback against some of this potential for power battles really, and misunderstandings of where people are coming from to you or how they feel you're expressing you to them. Now Venus, the planet of love and affection, but also loot, particularly in its rulership of Taurus, is actually in Taurus at that part of your year. That's encouraging you to have confidence to express what you need, but also show your affection and warmth of personality. Now March the 23rd sees Pluto move out of your sign for that brief sojourn into Aquarius to the 11th of June. This is really going to get you thinking. Saturn taught you a lot about being that much more structured, that much more disciplined, even for you, who's pretty good at all this stuff, and to look at perhaps your foundational world in a bit of a different way, your core values, but also maybe to clean up your act when it came to things like sugar and any calorific goodies, even alcohol can be very fattening. The second house can be where we really enjoy those kind of good things, and Saturn may have made you much more aware of the need to just get a better balance between those moments of enjoyment and the moments when we're quite happy with a cup of tea or coffee. But Pluto moving into your second house is going to have a much more radical and long-term transformational impact on those core values. In fact, it's hard to say just how powerful Pluto can be. The sign of Aquarius is the sign of community, but also the collective. It's also how we're interacting with one another, how we need each other, but it is going to see a lot of new technologies come in. Some of them can be very positive, like helping to spot health issues in advance, but others will be less so. We could see the kind of deforestation of work practices. You're someone who often gets a lot of satisfaction from being hardworking and disciplined. So the second house role of Pluto is going to be a big story, but I think that story will really start to come at the start of next year. But March the 25th is a really important moment because Mars has been in the sign of Gemini for such an extended period, 7 months and 6 days. It now moves into your opposite sign. Mars in the 7th house is brilliant for asserting our boundaries. Also, if we want a relationship, it can give us a bit of a push to actually go on that app, go out with friends, have some moments of mixing and mingling and fun and frivolity, which often can lead to kind of having some, sparky interaction with people that we encounter. But Mars in the 7th house is also great to be competitive. Mars is not at its best, technically, in the sign of Cancer. It's in its full, a bit like Uranus, because, ironically, it's exalted in your sign. So this is a weaker position for you, for Mars, but you can still turn it to your advantage over the next 6 weeks. If you do need to engage with others, if you're a sporty goat, great to play badminton or squash, anything which is a bit of a duel, fantastic. But if you are wanting to make progress around relationships which are ongoing, Mars in the 7th house is quite feisty. Just be aware of that. And of course, Cancer can be a little bit subjective. So the solar eclipse of the 20th or 21st of April, depending on where you are in the world, is conjunct Jupiter, the planet of growth. So if you're wanting to move, the following 6 months can be a key period for you. It's also squaring up this combination with Pluto. When Pluto and Jupiter are in more challenging aspects, such as a square or an opposition, they often give us added drive. If people have Pluto and Jupiter in more positive angles in their natal charts, they often do extremely well financially. So there could be an opportunity for you to do well here, but it's important to understand the rights of others, because the desire of this combination can see people take shortcuts. So something may be very attractive to you. It may even be a case of a property or a flat to rent comes up. You really want them, but maybe there's going to be more financial commitment, and you may need to check out your motives, Pluto, in the second house, just on the cusp, rather than necessarily just thinking about the more physical benefits of more space, more comfort, bigger garden, the things that we all aspire to. And that would be very understandable with that solar eclipse, especially with Jupiter bringing the potential for a stroke of fortune into the equation. So that next 6 months could see some Capricorns really thinking about a change of residency, improving where you live, adding to the family if you're wanting to have children. There may be a greater opportunity to understand more about your own emotional needs, but also the more emotional and nurturing sphere. That's going to be part of how Saturn in the third house as well can help you to rethink some of your approaches, some of those ideologies. But how they come out with this particular eclipse is a need for greater security. Now, May the 1st sees Mercury go into the second of its retrogrades, this time in your sister Earth sign of Taurus. Going to be retrograde through to the 15th. For you, this is house 5. If you're wanting to get together with others, have some social moments, then there can be some changes of plan, all the things that you know already with Mercury retrograde. But also remember that Mercury retrograde is a great opportunity to reprogram, replan, rejig, and approach things in a fresh and more enlightened way. And it could be around your self-expression, or around your social situation, or romantically, that Mercury's retrograde can help you in that regard. Now, May the 5th, 6th, depending on where you are in the world, is the reflection of the total lunar eclipse which occurred in the sign of Taurus on the 8th of November last year. So this one's in Scorpio. Scorpio obviously is a very deep feeling energy, but for you this goes across your 5th and 11th house cusp. But unlike the one that occurred in November, which was also activating those axes, there's no Saturn. Saturn's not providing a handbrake, a limitation. So it's a bit freer, and also the Sun is conjunct Uranus rather than the Moon. Now, the Moon opposite Uranus gives people a need for space, and so you may want to express yourself, but you may want to pursue some new interests. And even if you're in a long-standing relationship, just have a little bit more ventilation around the time you spend with one another. It can be good for the relationship. So this lunar eclipse, I think, much more positive than the one that brought you into the new year. Now, May the 16th, one of the most standout moments of the whole year for you personally, because Jupiter moves into your 5th house. This is going to offset some of the unsettling and rather changeable and at times unpredictable energies of Uranus. Uranus is obviously a planet that's concerned with the truth, but it's also concerned with radicalism. Jupiter can be to do with the higher spiritual domain because of its rulership of Pisces, but also, of course, it can be to do with growth, optimism, travel, boundaries, borders, foreign affairs in its rulership of Sagittarius. But in the earth sign of Taurus, I think this can be very good for your financial affairs. And even though Uranus and Jupiter are ultimately going into retrogrades, this gives you an opportunity to be more progressive around some of the more speculative or imaginative ideas you have. It can also bring, some potential for some flirty magic to your social and love situations. Now, May the 17th brings in a really magical alliance right through to June the 16th within 3 degrees. The reversing North Node in the 5th house of your situation meets Jupiter. They become exact on the 1st of June. If you would like to meet somebody new, this month of the year can really be very helpful. I'm not going to say that you're going to meet the person of your dreams, because I think it's really trivial. What I would say is you have a much greater opportunity to manifest the things that would really make you happy with this combination. Now, on May the 19th, there's also a new moon in your 5th house. Show people what makes you different and special. It's also forging a terrific sextile, which is enabling to Mars in your sector of relating. If you did want to go out on a date the following month, with this particular aspect, would really be a great time to make things happen. Now, on May the 20th, Mars moves out of the sign of Cancer and it moves into Leo. Now, Mars likes being in Leo because it's a bit show-offy. It's brilliant for kind of socializing. Anyone who's interested in performance or the arts often has Mars in Leo. But for you, this part of your horoscope is deeply to do with transformation. For example, if you're in a long-term relationship and you don't really feel any connectivity at a very deep level, I'm not talking about intimacy exclusively. Mars in the 8th house is quite obviously can be very much about sex and long-term financial creation, but it also can be to do with it's in its rulership of the sign of Scorpio, our understanding of how we recreate ourselves in this life. We don't have to stay in one format. We can evolve. So you're going to be pushed in the following 6 weeks to think about those things. But if you do fancy someone, with Mars going opposite Pluto the next day, this can be a very electric connection at this point in the year. Or you could have the biggest bust up you've experienced for a long time with a partner if you've both got very different approaches to marshalling your resources. Now, June the 1st sees that exact conjunction between Jupiter and North Node, which can be quite lucky. Now, on June the 6th, Venus joins up with Mars in Leo. Now, Venus in the 8th house can see money come to us through things like legacies, inheritances, property sales, but also from the fortune of someone we're involved with. So if someone that you're close to, whether it's a family member, business partner, or a romantic alliance, it could be them that enjoys some fortune. But the next 4.5 months, your desire for something really, really much more sensual and meaningful in your life in general. So if you're in a bit of a stale kind of alliance that has become very lacking in vitality and spark, your yearning for something much greater won't necessarily take you out of the relationship, but the yearning can be extraordinarily strong in the 4.5 months from the June the 6th through to the 9th of October. June the 11th, Pluto returns to Capricorn, your sign. So you've had a little bit of a think about your core values, about how you might make money, how you may transform the desire side of your nature. But now it comes back into your sign, so there may be a few more things you want to sort out in terms of your individual needs before you reassert that Plutonian need in January 24. Now this is really important. June the 17th, Saturn goes into retrograde. And it's going to be there through to the 4th of November. As ever, when Saturn goes retrograde, it slows things down. Could make you a bit more pessimistic. If there is somebody immediately around you, a neighbour, a sibling, someone you encounter every day that you really find quite difficult, the energy they have could be quite chaffing to your sensitivities that particularly are aroused this year by Neptune, remember. Even though Neptune's been in your third house for a long time. And you get an example of this pretty soon after then, when on June the 18th there's a Gemini new moon, which for you ordinarily would be a great time to, get the juicer out, think very much about how we can add a bit of virtue, but also how you might declutter, create more space, have a spring clean a little bit later on in the year if you're in the northern hemisphere. If it's the southern hemisphere, thinking about more of that autumn declutter. But the thing is that this particular event, which could be ordinarily very good for making you productive and precise, is actually squaring Neptune in your third house. Once more, your physical energy can seem to dissipate. You may feel a bit and once more Saturn in retrograde, it could be affecting your nervous system. So if you're feeling a bit stressed out and cheesed off and fenced in, and your energy seems to be draining away, this is a very important time to be thinking about what you're ingesting. I had an appointment earlier this week and stayed somewhere where the tap water really wasn't great, and it makes you aware of how lucky I am where I am, because we're very close to the sea, and obviously in Wales we're collecting water in reservoirs. It's not coming very far before I'm ingesting it. And also in my old house we had an inline water filter, because these are the things that we need to become more conscious of with Saturn in Pisces. So I feel that if there are ways that you can purify your system, this new moon would be a great time to really activate the plan. Now, June the 21st sees the summer solstice, and we begin Cardinal Quadrant 2 of 2023. So the next 13 weeks for us all, we're working towards the concept of nurture, of security, because of the sun's arrival in Cancer. But for you, this means the sun arrives in your 7th house of relating. And as it does, Venus and Mars in your 8th house of where it gets really seriously about the deep clinch, or the passion, or the power, or the serious money. They're together within 4 degrees on that cardinal quadrant. So it could be a very exciting time for relationships, certainly in the following 4 weeks when the sun's still in Cancer, but there could be an echo of it right through to the autumnal equinox. Jupiter is also forging a very constructive link to Saturn on that event. So Jupiter in your 5th house of creativity, bubbliness, in a great link to Saturn in your 3rd house of everyday communication. Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts, together they create balance. So a good idea that you've got could gain traction from that point. July the 12th, the North Node moves into the sign of Aries for the first time in 18 and a half years. If you're older, what were you doing 18 and a half years ago? If you can recall that, you can see some similarities between then and how your desires just seem to manifest out of nowhere. It pulls you in a direction which feels right, because the North Node is very much about the collective consciousness, and your need is going to feel greater need is going to be for peace, tranquility and safety in your immediate environments. Now, July the 17th sees a Cancer new moon, which is great for your relationships, and this one also forges a brilliant link to Uranus. So in the following 4 weeks, a real surprise encounter may crop up. If you're single, you may have to make a quick decision. Someone may say, look, someone's dropped out, do you want to come to us to watch this band, or go to a dance or a club, or come out for the evening, and you may be there in your pyjamas and your curlers. Well, I would be in my curlers, but keep it quiet. I haven't got that much hair as it is. And something spontaneous and quick, therefore, could see you reacting, and do you know, before you know it, you're having a very exciting experience, so bear that in mind. But July the 23rd does see Venus go retrograde, so if there is discussion about shared finances, watch out for people's motivations, but equally watch out for your own, because remember, Venus was conjunct Pluto in your chart right at the start of the year, so your desire to gain something this year could be leveraged through the apparent sincerity and charm of Venus, but behind it can be the silk fist of Pluto. So we all need to be conscious of how we operate to get what we want. So Venus conjunct Pluto can see a more synthetic sincerity be masked by, masking the true desire. Now, I'm not saying that will be true of you personally, but it could be something you experience, because remember, energy comes towards us as well as us propelling it outwards. So you may experience someone who tends to use manipulation, control, jealousy to get what they want, or you just need to be more conscious of your motives. So very important with Venus retrograde in the 8th house, the most intense location really, to be conscious of that. August the 1st, Aquarius full moon, your 2nd house. It's almost like a reprise of what Saturn asked you to look at in those 2.25 years by the turn of the year, 2.5 years when he went into the sign of Pisces on March the 7th. There's also, however, a great link between Mars in Virgo now, very much about precision and sacrifice, with Jupiter. Jupiter again giving you lots of help in your 5th house. If there's an opportunity to travel, these two ordinarily would be great, because they give you a lot of gusto and drive and passion to go for it. What's not to like? Well, it's that Mercury's in Virgo, even though it governs that sign, but it's being checked by Saturn. So if there is a buoyant conversation you have at the start of August, just check the fine print, because Mercury opposite Saturn, your ruler, could see suddenly a big collision of ideas, or a big restraint or restriction on how you're trying to edge something forwards. August the 16th, however, is probably one of the most magical lunations of the year, because the Sun loves the new moon, because obviously the Sun rules the sign of Leo, it doesn't rule any other sign. But Venus is conjunct this particular event. It may be retrograde, but this could bring rewards for you, particularly if you've been very hardworking, very sacrificing, and perhaps you've built a relationship by a lot of really working together in a very determined way. Some kind of major financial breakthrough is possible in the following month. August the 23rd, however, Mercury enters its 3rd retrograde of the year in your sister Earth sign of Virgo. So if you are travelling along with that rather straightened opposition between Mercury and Saturn on the 1st of the month, just be aware that this could be a difficult or more tricky situation over the next few weeks. But same also about documents and contracts. The 9th house retrograde there, ultra precision around anything you personally can influence. Now, August the 27th is actually really exciting for you. And the reason for that is that Mars is exalted in your sign. It's actually in detriment in the sign of Libra, but for 6 weeks it rises right to the top of your scope, which can help you to manifest your brilliance with extra confidence and drive and determination in the following 6 weeks. So that's a great change. August the 29th, however, sees Uranus slam on those brakes again. If you're still trying to find the right formula, particularly in your love life, to be honest, or even with your kids, how much space they need, how much space you need, Do we need to be a bit more devoted and sacrifice some of our space in order to get the best out of our relationships? It's a difficult balance to find in these very highly intense and electronically configured modern days that we live in. August the 31st, however, sees a really tough full moon in the sign of Pisces, conjunct Saturn. So this is where Saturn really does, along with that opposition with Mercury on the 1st of August, come back in a bit more of a challenging way. How do you manage this? Well, it's across your 3rd and 9th houses, but the sign of Pisces is about the spiritual dimension. It is about the ephemeral. It can be about healing, whereas the sign of Virgo is more about the practical dimension. It's about the details. It's wanting some kind of physical or tangible evidence. So if there's something, an idea that you're working with or working on with someone, and someone comes along and says, look, this just really doesn't stack up, the idealism, if you like, of Pisces, which can be a little bit unrealistic at times, is really going to be fractured at that point of the year. However, on September the 3rd, Venus does go direct. Good news for those business interests, and even for that simmering attraction to someone that could still be the highlight of this whole year. September the 4th, however, sees Jupiter go retrograde through to the 30th of December. So this is in your 5th house of romance. Jupiter retrograde can slow things down. It's almost like a giant Mercury retrograde, but Jupiter is about expansion. The sign of Taurus is about money. I think for all of us, there could be some more aftershocks in terms of the financial system, although I do think Jupiter is going to bring better news in 23 than we may all fear at the end of 22. But certainly some kind of extra slowing down, limitation. We may be socialising a bit less because we'll all be prioritising our expenditure. September the 15th, however, sees a brilliant new moon for you. If you do want to head off on that vacation, it's linked with Uranus, suggests this could happen quickly, unexpectedly, particularly with Mercury going direct on the same day. September the 23rd sees the autumnal equinox. The sun moves into Libra, and for the next 13 weeks we're all concerned with relating. But for you, the relating is very much about your position in the world. So work, your role in any local organisations or committees where you may play a leading role, your desire to gain greater recognition and respect from others is going to be really strong on the back of that cardinal quadrant. But you know, as the sun makes its way into the sign of the balance, the scales, the midpoint's actually in Scorpio, which is for you, your sector of friendship. It's actually forging a brilliant opposition to Jupiter. So the following few weeks, I feel, can see some very bubbly stuff around your social situation. The only caveat is that professionally, the sun forges a quincunx with Saturn on that cardinal quadrant. So that the following 13 weeks, the difference between how you're putting your ideas across and wanting to gain recognition and how other people see your ideas coming across could create the impression that you want a might is right situation, that it's only on your terms. That is going to require a little bit of care, despite the fact that the midpoint is in a very bubbly alliance with Jupiter. So socially it can be good, professionally more challenging, I feel. Now October the 12th, brilliant for you because Mars moves into your sector of friendship for 6 weeks. Also the solar eclipse on October the 14th, as I mentioned at the outset, fabulous for your goals and ambitions, and it does conjunct with Mercury. So how you portray your ideas, how you articulate and interact with others is the key. But remember that very challenging quincunx, 150-degree angle between the Sun and Saturn on that cardinal quadrant. You must bear that in mind and work exceptionally hard at trying to understand what others may want from you. It's not saying that you should give them everything they want. That would be very 7th house and Libran to a degree, you're a cardinal sign, but you do need to be aware of the politics and the dynamic and what's expected. If you want to make it all the way to the top in a big organisation, then you're going to have to play to the rules that are there. If you're more of a natural bohemian, I think this particular phase of the year can be very good for you. So if you're wanting to push back about what is expected in some kind of construct, that's where the problems can occur. So on October the 28th, we have the lunar eclipse, which occurred on the 8th of November last year. But whereas last year saw Saturn as a mischief maker, this year it's a massive asset. So the creativity that comes from Uranus being in the sign of Taurus is really balanced by the more stable influence of Saturn. Now, November the 1st sees the new moon in your sector of friendship, and that too is supported by Saturn. So the people that really understand where you come from, the people that you feel very secure with, those relationships can take a step forwards. November the 4th, Saturn goes direct. You'll take that all day long. On November the 24th, however, a bit tricky. Mars moves into your 12th house. The new moon in Sagittarius of December the 12th is also conjunct Mars. Something that's been simmering of a psychological nature all year could explode into the open, particularly if there's someone you really don't like and you feel there's perhaps been chipping away at how you express yourself, or isn't you feel particularly kind, or there's sort of even faint praise which is meant actually to be quite critical. Some kind of trigger could set you off at this point of the year, particularly with Mercury going retrograde on the 13th. But do be aware that the winter solstice that comes in a day later this year in 23, the 4th of the cardinal quadrants in 23 itself, actually has some really good stuff. The midpoint, it's again in Pisces, but it is conjunct Saturn. So it's kind of saying to you, your desire to really let some people know, look, this is who I am, and, there's been a few naughty things said. The Mars stuff may bring it into the open, but this particular event sees the Sun and Mercury in a terrific link with Saturn and in a terrific link with Jupiter. There is a moon in Taurus at this point as well, broadly helpful. It just squares with Pluto. So again, balancing your need to have your say, the third house, against other people's viewpoints. It could be a bit wobbly with that square with the moon and Pluto. It's a very evocative aspect, that. But just be aware, December the 23rd, the retreating Mercury moves into the 4th zodiac sign of the year, into your 12th house. This could see you, surprisingly for you, perhaps wanting a few days just at this very social part of the year, just maybe a few moments, even if it's 10 minutes here and there, to yourself. But then the December the 27th new moon in your sign brings the year to a close with a fantastic flourish, because although Jupiter is retrograde, it forges a trine with this new moon. So you're going to burst into year 2024 with an enormous amount of gusto, optimism, and get-go. But just at the end of this year, I just feel that as Jupiter goes direct on the 30th, that Mercury retrograde in the 12th house could surprise you. It may be a case that you want to be sociable, but with an extremely select group of people. And I think that's the big lesson for this year, is about how information is shared these days. There's so much distortion, and I feel that the ideas that you're going to be thinking about or experiencing, the energy that's immediately around you, you're going to be a lot more sensitive to it. But Saturn's going to give you the tools to push back on what's not good for you. But that's going to be the learning curve of this year. But there are still opportunities for great fun and creativity through Jupiter, and also to reset your emotional world and immediate environment through the North Node and that solar eclipse in Aries. Take care, all the best, and goodbye.